and answered. Please also mute your audio device when you don't speak so that we avoid superposition of voices. Okay, I will present you then the agenda, the summary for this webinar. After the welcome and introduction that I will be doing shortly with Daniela, in collaboration with Daniela, you will have an overview and framing of the topic, and then the two presentations. The first presentation done by Professor William Mosley on regional value chain and productivity enhancement, the cases of rice and cocoa in West Africa, followed by a first set of questions and answers. Then there will be a second presentation done by Olawale Ismail, Dr. Olawale Ismail, on regional security by observation, assessing regional responses to the Boko Haram crisis. Then there will be a second set of questions and answers, and then in the end I will be inviting you with LenCD representatives to give us 10 minutes of your time to answer our participant survey, because this is the first webinar of a series organized by LenCD with other stakeholders, and so because it is the first one, it is important for us to have your feedbacks and advices on how to keep this event going and to improve for the next one. Okay, I will be giving the floor now to Daniela Di Pillo, who will be introducing LenCD to all of you. Please, Daniela.
Hello everyone. My name is Daniela Di Pillo. I hope you can hear me well. I am connected to the European Commission because the European Commission is one of the co-chair of the steering group of LenCD. LenCD is an informal and open learning network on capacity development, and I don't know if you are familiar with it, but I think you have received the invitation with the link of LenCD, which is www.lencd.org. And the objective of LenCD is to promote and facilitate sharing of lessons and learning on capacity development. And this exercise, this webinar is part of a long series of experience of knowledge sharing between the members of LenCD, which includes international organization, partner government organization, NGO from donors and partner countries. At the moment, the network is co-chaired by ACBF, so the African Capacity Building Foundation, and the European Commission. I would also like to add that this is the first experience in organizing webinars, but the network has a long history of knowledge sharing, and in particular of giving the possibility of having learning events around capacity development. The network has been closely involved in all the dialogue concerning the effectiveness agenda, so from Paris to Houston and recently to Mexico. And this initiative, the initiative of this webinar, we hope that this will be one of the first of a series of webinars, is to linking the bridge between different practitioner community on capacity development. Christina already told a little bit about the agenda of today and the presenters. I would just like to add that we would like to look not only on the methodological side of capacity development, so what we call, let's say, get organized part, but we would like also to look on the how on capacity development. So not only looking at the challenges that capacity development can have in a given situation in a particular country, but also to have concrete experience on how to deal with the challenges that practitioner can have in the country within programs and projects of different sectors. I say that this is a first experience of webinar, but we already have, let's say, in the pipeline, a second one that will be organized by the Center for International Media Systems, and will be probably around the 21st of May. You will have all the information of LenCD in the LenCD web page. I'm writing in the chat the link to the dedicated page of this initiative, so you will have definitely more information at the web page. And I think that's all about LenCD. I would just to closing with saying that if you are interested, if you would like to have an active role in the network, again, the network is informal and it's open, so we will be happy to listen your position, your activities, and if you would also like to get involved in this experience, we can also to a certain extent support you in organizing such an event like this one. I will give you that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniele. So here we are to the overall framing of the topic. So as Daniele has just said, ACBF Africa Capacity Building Foundation is one of the two co-chairs of LenCD, and ACBF has been invited by LenCD to co-organize this webinar, not only because it is, as you see in this slide, one of the leading institutions having capacity development role on the continent, so leading capacity development in the continent in Africa, but also for a second reason, because actually ACBF has an engagement in AFCOP, so the African Community of Practices, or Communauté Africaine de Pratique in French, which is an online platform of practitioners in Africa and around the world that want to help build African MSDR capacity, so MSDR being managing for development results capacity in Africa, with a series of stakeholders and practitioners from Africa, but also from outside the continent. So let's get, of course, you can go online on AFCOP and on ACBF website and get more information about the platform and about the organization. I would like just quickly, before giving the floor to our first presenters, introduce our team for today, so the regional development team, just saying a few words, saying just that regional development is intended today for us here as a regional approach to development. And this regional approach to development is needed in Africa, it doesn't have to be questioned. It is a regional perspective on development that has been supported by many African leaders and stakeholders. But our perspective for this webinar today is to look at regional development from a capacity perspective. So our accent today for the two presentations, as well as for the question and answer today, is on the capacity dimension, or on the capacity approach, as you wish, for regional development. So I would like to emphasize only 4 aspects among the many that could be emphasized on the capacity dimension. The first approach, or the first dimension, is what capacities, what priorities in terms of capacity we need for a regional approach. Leadership in Africa, certainly, but also what about citizens' capacity, and so CSOs, for example, capacities for better institutions, and so on. What to prioritize and how to get these or other capacities improved. And in order to do this, what strategies need to be set in place to build these capacities. Partnerships today is a strategy that has been emphasized so much in Africa, but also assessment of capacities to prioritize and to know what capacities are needed. And of course, formulate and implement capacity development intervention for development results, because we are talking about AFROP, and many other strategies are possible. So I would like this webinar contribute to talk about these issues and see what points of view and what strategies can be set in place. What challenges are also, of course, possible when doing this process, when starting these processes. We can talk about financing, we can talk about coordinations of different levels of capacity building, or of different actions of capacity building between the regional, the national, the local level, and so on. And we can talk about policies, needs of policies, adapted policies, what kind of policies need to be set in place at the national level to make the regional level effective and efficient. And in the end, I think the scope, the role of this webinar is to think and to give directions on how to obtain an effective change process. Because in the end, this is what LenCD wants to obtain through this series of webinar, and more precisely for this precise webinar on regional development. And of course, how to manage and how to maintain these results and these changes for results, to get synergies among stakeholders, and in the end results in Africa. So I will be stopping here. I don't want to be long. I just wanted to give you some opening to allow you to get into details and to question our presenters on these and other issues that, of course, you are free to raise on capacities for regional development. So without using more time, I will be giving the floor to Professor William Mosley, who is the Chair of Geography and the Director of African Studies at Macalester College, St. Paul, Minnesota in the USA, who has also been working with ACBF on different initiatives. I'm very pleased to give the floor to Professor Mosley for his presentation. Thank you very much.
Can anybody hear me now? Ah. All right, I think we can start now. I apologize for that.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. So, I want to thank Tina and Danielle for the introduction, and I'd also like to thank LenCD for inviting
Bill, we can't hear you. Please make sure that.
Okay, can people hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. All right, I'm going to give you a bit of background, and then we'll start the proper paper. So value chains, or the linkages from raw materials to finished products, have become a central focus of economic development activities in recent years. While the value chain approach is not a new idea, it is being emphasized anew in development scholarship and practice. To date, initiatives to facilitate value chain development have occurred largely within the borders of nation-states, although it is increasingly understood that some value chains may make more sense at the regional scale. African states' participation in regional value chains has been limited. A lack of economic cooperation and production across African borders may be linked in part to historical and political factors that exacerbate cross-border tensions. Other factors limiting economic cooperation and integration, especially within Africa's regional economic communities, are more economic and cultural in nature, including poor infrastructure, linguistic barriers, weak regulatory environments, and poor border administration, each of which can increase transaction costs. The goal of this presentation is to review the current state of value chains and production across African borders. More specifically, the presentation explores the role of regionalism in value chain development and examines ways to expand its most valuable aspects. The presentation also explores the kinds of policies and capacity building initiatives that will be most effective for allowing Africa to better capitalize on cross-border value chain opportunities for economic development and improved livelihoods. The presentation highlights two case studies, the first examining a West African regional rice market, and the second exploring shared cacao processing and chocolate production between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. I came to this research as somewhat of a skeptic of the value chain approach because I was not convinced that further incorporation of Africans into the capitalist system was always in their best interest. However, I've come to the conclusion that this is a useful approach because it can help African economies move out of their peripheral position as producers of raw materials only in the global economy. As such, the overarching thesis of this paper is that building more robust value chains in Africa is critical for transforming raw materials into finished products, encouraging industrialization, and moving African economies beyond their peripheral position. Regional value chains may further develop this capacity by leveraging complementarities among different African countries and fostering knowledge creation and skill enhancement within the region. According to Haram and Meyer, a value chain can be defined as the full range of activities which are required to bring a product or service from conception through the different phases of production, delivery to final customers, and final disposal after use. Within the African aid context, the global value chain approach is a key element in, for example, agricultural development that then leads to even broader forms of industrial development. Continuing with the ag example, the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa uses value chains to a certain end and sees these as a sequence of activities focused on the transformation of a crop from the farm to the national level. This figure depicts these different steps for the AGRA project from inputs to farming, processing, distribution, and trading. The value chain literature is dominated by economists and businessmen and specialists, but bears a strong resemblance to more interdisciplinary social science scholarship on commodity chains, as well as other relevant economic geography literature on economic interdependence and agglomeration effects. The economistic global value chain literature views globalization as largely positive, framing those not integrated into the global economy as disadvantaged. In contrast, the world system theory-inspired commodity chain approach sees these very same articulations as potentially problematic. The rub in much of this analysis is that African producers have limited agency in their engagement with these chains, whereas firms based in the global north hold disproportionate sway. The question is how African producers and actors can enhance their power vis-a-vis these chains. One possible way for African producers to garner greater control within global value chains would be to encourage more upgrading of products on the continent. Furthermore, the value chain concept also has interesting connections to an older literature on import substitution. While this connection is somewhat missing in the Anglophone scholarship, it is alive and well in the Francophone African policy literature pertaining to the filière approach. While traditional import substitution industries often struggled because of small markets in many African countries, the potential for regional scale import substitution was not seriously considered in the first decades following African independence. Regional economic integration typically focuses on removing barriers to free trade and increasing the movement of people, labor, goods, and capital across national borders. It may also involve strategic investments in economic development initiatives that benefit multiple national stakeholders. Regional economic integration and cooperation may facilitate some types of upgrading and value chain formation. While national planners likely prefer to pursue upgrading and value chain formation within their own borders, this may not be possible for many goods in a significant number of African countries. It is important to recall that of the 48 African countries, continental countries plus Madagascar, of these only 11 have populations of 25 million or more, and only 14 are estimated to have gross domestic products of US 50 billion or more. As such, roughly two-thirds of African nations are dealing with relatively small internal markets as depicted in this cartogram, making the traditional import substitution model inherently limited. More integrated regional markets would allow for greater levels of exports and trade with surrounding states, thus allowing for greater potential neighborhood effects, the idea that you benefit indirectly when your neighbor's economy flourishes. However, because of constraints on demand within domestic markets, African upgrading is often focused on a handful of products with significant export potential. Unfortunately, a complicating factor for export-oriented upgrading is the relatively high number of landlocked countries in Africa, a third or 16 of 48 countries. In the absence of efficient border crossings, being landlocked typically makes it difficult to cheaply move heavier products to port for export. Due to small market size and high transit costs for many African countries, regional economic integration may be especially useful for reducing the expense of trans-border transactions, fostering vertical integration within regions, building agglomeration economies, increasing the size of internal markets, ensuring coordination, and sharing knowledge as well as R&D functions. This figure depicts transit costs and times along selected major highway routes in West Africa. While some of these costs are accrued at roadside checkpoints within countries, a high proportion do occur at and around international border crossings. Minimizing the time and cost of international border crossings is critical for building regional value chains. Regional integration may also foster agglomeration effects, which are the cost advantages that accrue to individual firms because of their location within a cluster. Examples of this might be proximity to suppliers and buyers or shared use of transportation infrastructure. Related to agglomeration effects is the notion of localization economies. Here you have a clustering of firms in one particular industry as opposed to the more generic clustering with agglomeration effects because they mutually benefit from positive externalities. There may be a shared pool of labor with special skills, specialized technical schools, research institutes, and so forth. A key question with regional integration and with some degree of specialization between countries is who will do what. In other words, how does one rationally integrate different national players into a single value chain? One potential model for thinking about economic integration, regional value chains, and complementarity is the flying geese paradigm, developed by Japanese economist Kaname Akamutsu, who in 1962 argued for regional economic integration between different types of economies. Akamatsu's thesis argued that Asian nations would catch up with the West by forming an Asian regional bloc within which the poorest countries produced the commodities that were subsequently transformed in the more advanced countries. The metaphor was a flock of geese in V formation, with Japan in the lead, then the second tier of NICs, followed by the lesser developed countries in the region. In other words, Akamatsu was essentially arguing for an acceptance of regional dualism as a way to break out of international dualism or international core-periphery relationships. One can certainly imagine such complementary economies in the African context. Countries with different factor endowments might include industrial South Africa and its neighbors, or food-rich Mali and more agro-processor Cote d'Ivoire. In the face of high border crossing charges and tariffs, African countries often find it cheaper to import goods from non-African origins rather than their neighbors, and or export raw materials to non-African destinations rather than adjacent states for transformation. This section explores two examples where regional value chains could make a real difference for economic development. An internally oriented regional value chain opportunity, rice in West Africa, and an externally oriented regional value chain opportunity, cacao in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. In recent decades, trade in West African cities have often found it preferable to import rice rather than source it from their hinterlands or neighboring states because of limited support from local producers, low international tariff barriers, poor milling quality, and expensive internal transport costs. The structural adjustment era of the 80s and 90s decimated support in terms of extension and research for rice production across West Africa. Declining import tariffs combined with cheap rice from abroad further facilitated dependence on imports. The growing reliance on imports was also exacerbated by slightly different factors in specific countries. Cote d'Ivoire, for example, suffered from low milling quality after large industrial mills were shut down following neoliberal reform. In contrast, the Gambia was plagued by poor roads that separated producers upcountry from the milling facility in major markets in Banjul. These graphs depict first consumption and how it's rising in West Africa relative to the rest of the continent, production and increasing imports, and then finally the price bump that rice took in the late 2000s. What these graphs don't show you is untapped production potential, milling, and transportation constraints. Overdependence by urbanites on non-African rice supplies became a huge problem during the 2007-2008 global food crisis, when rice prices doubled. As shown in this map, food riots broke out around the globe with a particular concentration in West Africa. The reality is that West African rice producers could supply these urban populations. The combination of a long history of rice production, shared research, and milling infrastructure, improved transportation networks, and more efficient border crossings could make the region more self-sufficient in rice production. While rice should not be emphasized at the expense of other food crops, especially orphan crops needed for more diverse agroecosystems, there is an argument to be made for replacing non-edible cash crops with food crops, such as rice, that may be traded regionally. With a robust market for rice in West Africa, the returns on this market may be better than those for conventional cash crops. Such a shift might also add some stability to regional food markets and reduce the outflow of cash for food purchases. Another example of a missed regional value chain opportunity related to higher border transaction costs, lack of coordination, and missing shared investment is Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire's exportation of raw cacao rather than shared regional chocolate production. Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire are the top 2 cacao producers in the world and jointly account for 60 to 70% of global production. Yet West African cacao producers have been unable to leverage this dominance for a higher return on their crops. In fact, a typical cacao farmer sees approximately 4% of the price consumers pay for a chocolate bar in a store. As such, the disconnect between the consumers of this luxury item and the poverty of those who produce its main ingredient, cacao, is rather startling. Given that this crop originally hails from Latin America and has virtually no place in West African cuisine, it might be tempting to abandon it altogether as a cash crop. Yet West African farmers remain competitive in this arena because cacao is actually cheaper to produce on small farms, as the plants require a lot of individual attention. Ryan concludes that fair trade efforts to garner a higher return for West African farmers have been largely unsuccessful. Rather, government and regional cooperation could play a critical role in developing chocolate production. A regional value chain around these 2 cacao-producing powerhouses could retain a significantly larger proportion of profits in the region and create new employment opportunities. This figure shows the major cacao growing areas in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana and West Africa. A shared chocolate production facility and related transportation arteries would most logically be located in the southern border area between the 2 countries. Differences in colonial language traditions, French and English, would certainly be an obstacle to be overcome. I will now briefly explore the actors involved in their roles in regional value chain development, including the African Union and regional economic communities as well as private firms. In early 2008, ministers responsible for trade, mining, and industry at the African Union began considering a new industrialization strategy based on development corridors. The corridor approach was seen as to better link countries and create regional supply chains. The belief was that improved regional infrastructure and logistics could consolidate supply chains, enhance access to inputs at lower cost, and improve delivery of products to customers. The corridor approach has been linked explicitly to Asian experiences inspired by the flying geese paradigm discussed earlier. Cross-continental development corridors would pave the way for resource-based regional value chains by overcoming infrastructure constraints. Furthermore, it was argued that these corridors would allow for the reinvestment of profits into human resources development and R&D, with the outcome being resource industrial clusters. The figure here depicts a hypothetical or idealized development corridor. In this transnational space, typically spanning 2 to 3 countries, one could imagine shared transportation infrastructure and R&D facilities. Such a space could also foster the agglomeration effects discussed earlier in this talk. There are currently 20 such corridors in Africa. The UN Conference on Trade and Development is recommending that African countries and regional economic communities transform traditional transport corridors into development corridors. This may make sense in many instances because it leverages existing investments. That said, existing corridors may not always line up well with development opportunities. Case in point, these corridors may not match up with the best site for a shared cacao processing facility between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire for joint production of chocolate, or for transport of rice between major production areas, milling facilities, and markets in West Africa. Africa's regional economic communities are now becoming increasingly engaged with development corridors and regional value chains. The 8 RECs recognized by the AU are moving towards implementing the Abuja Treaty on freer inter-African trade at different speeds. Private sector firms are also central actors in regional value chains. Players are as diverse as supermarkets, mining firms, agro-dealers, and other agro-processors, and many are engaged in working across African national boundaries. Another type of actor that is rarely discussed in the literature on value chains are labor unions, be it for laborers or farmers. Such organizations are an important component of African civil society and can play key roles in mitigating some of the most egregious downsides of regional integration or development corridors. Unions often play critical roles in leveling the playing field across border in terms of wages and producer prices. Strong producer unions can also advocate for African value chains on the international stage. So in conclusion, regional value chains hold the potential to drive sustainable growth in income and employment in sub-Saharan Africa. Key to unlocking this potential is implementation of the kinds of policies likely to be most effective in achieving this goal. To succeed, these policies should be supported by capacity building initiatives that will allow African nations to expand cross-border value chains for economic development and livelihood. So 3 quick recommendations quickly. It makes sense to pool resources to engage in regionally relevant research and development. Secondly, we need to establish one-stop border posts. This is a key tool for trade facilitation. The concept is used to minimize delays at cross-border points on major transport corridors in the region. And then thirdly, we need to focus on transformation of agricultural products at the regional scale. Several African cities have served as regional hubs for transformation of agricultural products. While such industries may be unsustainable at the national scale, particularly in smaller countries, regional markets make these industries more viable. I've also argued in this presentation that cacao and rice processing at the regional scale in West Africa makes a great deal of sense. In sum, the overarching conclusion is that more robust value chains in Africa is critical for transforming raw materials into finished products, encouraging industrialization, and moving African economies beyond their peripheral position. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much for this great presentation. I don't see any question in the chat room, although Serverit is writing, so I don't know if a question is coming. But in the meantime, I would like to ask a question, Bill, that came to me listening to your presentation. You mentioned the social science scholarship weaknesses on commodity chains around the African continent. And of course, this rings me a bell to ask you what capacities could be, in your opinion, set in place for knowledge generation and sharing on value chains, related disciplines or related knowledge?
Yeah, that's a great question. As I pointed out, I think there's an interesting tension between the more economistic value chain literature and those from the other social sciences. And I think the economistic literature basically sees it as a problem that African producers aren't more integrated into the global system, whereas other social sciences are a bit leery and see this as a problem because it might reinforce African producers' peripheral position. I think the key here, and this is sometimes missing in the value chain literature, is you don't want to become dependent on inputs to that process that are produced elsewhere. So you kind of become subservient to, say, agricultural inputs that are produced elsewhere in the world. So I think the focus needs to be on value chains and vertical integration that are autonomous, and this is more likely to happen at the regional scale. In terms of capacity building to allow that to happen, it's allowing African firms to kind of flourish and operate more freely within regions, and currently they face a lot of constraints. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. I see a question here from on the chat room from Frank Oyang, and I turn it to you because it is for you. He is asking, can the orphan crops be transformed for economic benefit at a regional level?
I think there's potential here. So orphan crops refers to In the case of Africa, Africa-specific crops that don't have a large regional or international market. But if you took something like sorghum, for example, I think there are huge possibilities to develop a regional market here that wouldn't be viable in terms of exporting to other regions of the world, but certainly within Africa. And I think by developing that market, you could actually have more sustainable agriculture because millet, sorghum, these crops are, they use less water, so they would be less susceptible to drought and longer term, less susceptible to climate change. So that's a great question.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bill. I see a lot of questions in the chat room coming out progressively, and it gives me the occasion, because I see a lot of names that I know, to thank ASCOP members that are active in this webinar and are asking questions, and also ACBF staff members that are participating and asking questions. And I would like to take the occasion to ask you for a question from Rosie Atindeu from ACBF that is linking to what I was asking you, saying you indicated three major actors: Rex, private firm, and labor union. What could be the role of think tanks and advocacy institutions as well as governments? I think it's a very interesting question.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think historically some advocacy institutions have been leery of tighter connections with the global economy, and I think advocacy organizations could broker serious conversations about the pros and cons of greater regional integration and value chains across borders. And I think citizens of different African countries, once they better understand that this is a way to kind of improve the status, that their country benefits from regional integration, and by the region becoming stronger economically, everyone in that region would benefit.
Yeah, I agree with you. Bill. And I think also that what Roger was probably thinking is that think tanks and policy and of course the role in policy making and policy advice can be crucial also to build capacities to improve regional value chains. So I think that probably was in his mind when he wrote this question. So this goes to our capacity dimension. I see a lot of questions that are coming. Although I've been writing, Laurentia, Mona, and so on. I think Bill will respond to all of you during the 48 hours. So in a written mode, because we cannot answer all these questions right now. We will be running out of time. I would like to thank Bill again for his presentation, and thank all of you for the questions. And I will be turning the microphone to Olawale Ismail for his presentation on regional security by observation, assessing regional responses to Boko Haram crisis. And actually we are complementing this first presentation, because here we are addressing the other part of the medal, we could say, by what problems can the regional approach help. I just would like to say that Dr. Ismail is the head of research at International Alert and research associate and fellow at the Conflict Security and Development Group at King's College, University of London. I give the floor to Dr. Ismail for his presentation. Thank you.
Hello, this is Daniele. Always, if you can try to connect your audio and your video, would be nice. In the meanwhile, I will just reply to Serge. We are sorry, but we participants can ask questions in the chat box. But as Christina was mentioning, we have a web page dedicated on this, and you will find a recorded version of this webinar in this web page. I can copy and paste the link again. So further question can be also raised in the LenCD web page here. Christina, I see that Olawi is almost ready. Olawi, please go ahead when you're ready. Christina, do you want to add something on the introduction in the meanwhile?
Thank you, Daniele. Olawale, are you ready, or do you want me to keep speaking? Olawale, your microphone is muted, so that's the reason we cannot hear you.
Olawi, the green icon on the top bar should be green if you want to speak.
Yes.
Yes, now we can hear you. Yes, now we can hear you.
If you can, it's a possibility to also start the webcam.
Okay. I'm supposed to, okay, if I like, or is it optional?
As you prefer, if you.
Okay.
Yes, we can see you now.
Good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, depending on the time zone, or actually good morning if you are in North America. Thanks to Bill for setting the ball rolling, and for his presentation on rice and cocoa in West Africa. As has been introduced by Christina, I'll be talking on regional security by observation, assessing regional responses to the Boko Haram crisis. It is quite instructive that there is global attention has been quite focused on the Boko Haram crisis in the last week or two. In the context of the kidnapping of about 200 young girls by Boko Haram militants in Borno, in northeast region of Nigeria. And I think there is ongoing campaign in the global media, especially on social media platforms, demanding for the release of these girls. Similarly, it has also put the Nigerian government, especially the federal government of Nigeria, on the global spotlight. And for once, the government is feeling the pressures or the heat of having to account for the missing girls. But the Boko Haram crisis is not new. For
students and analysts and key watchers of it. It has been something, you know, that has been growing, that has been brewing from 2009, when the current state of the insurgency, when it actually started. My presentation today is not focused entirely on discussing the Boko Haram crisis exhaustively. I'm only trying to look at it from a regional security perspective in terms of what are the implications of Boko Haram crisis for regional security thinking and practice in Africa. How does it challenge existing institutions and mechanisms of regional security in Africa, not least in West Africa? So accordingly, my presentation will be guided by 3 key questions. My presentation will be guided by 3 key questions. The first is that, to what extent can the vectors of regional security in Africa, namely regional economic integration bodies, which we normally call REC, to what extent can they actually provide or deliver regional security as envisaged in existing policy declarations and mechanisms? Secondly, is that in light of the Boko Haram crisis, what are the specific conceptual and policy lessons to be discerned, to be deciphered, specifically in terms of what capacities are missing or needed, what works well currently, and what works less well? Third is that, what are the impacts of the responses, in terms of responses to the Boko Haram crisis, on orthodox regional security systems and mechanisms in Africa? The response patterns, are they compatible and interoperable with existing mechanisms, or do they represent rival visions of regional security arrangement in Africa? These are the key 3 guiding questions for my presentation today. Be that as it may, permit me to quickly brush through or provide broad overview of the Boko Haram crisis. When did it start? How did it evolve? What are the structural causes? What are the proximate causes? How did it, emerge as a regional security challenge? And what are the existing patterns? What are the existing patterns of response to it? In terms of its origin, the Boko Haram crisis started with the emergence of a group known as the Nigerian Taliban movement in and around 2002. The Nigerian Taliban movement had its base in Yobe, in the northeast region. I think they first came onto the global spotlight when they attacked some local police stations in remote areas of Yobe, which is in the northeast region of Nigeria. They attacked some police stations and they actually burned down the police station. They took away arms and ammunition from the police station and hoisted a flag reminiscent of the Taliban movement in Afghanistan. That was in 2002. Between 2002 and 2003, the group actually founded a base for itself. They undertook what they call an AGRA. AGRA is a movement away from mainstream city or society to remote areas. It was an exercise of seclusion for spiritual growth and spiritual purification. They went to a remote area called Kanema, which again is in the northeast, one of the remote regions or communities in the northeast region of Nigeria. Between 2004 and by 2004, owing to clashes with other communities in and around Kanema, the Boko Haram movement relocated back to the city, and then they started, rebuilding their membership base in the city of Maiduguri in Borno. Maiduguri is the capital of Borno in northeast Nigeria. So they founded, new bases in Maiduguri, and they started expanding from Maiduguri to neighboring states, especially in Bauchi and Adamawa State. All of these states are in the northeast region of Nigeria. By 2009, the group had grown in popularity. The membership base had increased. They had expanded within and outside of Maiduguri in Borno State, and they had become in touch, or they were already in alliance with key political parties and politicians who courted the group for political purposes, especially to win elections. To the extent that there was disagreement and fallout with some of the political parties and politicians, especially the opposition ANCC party in the northeast part of Nigeria. The disagreement with the government in power in Borno State led to clashes with police, and after the killing of some 12 policemen, the president in 2009 ordered a full-scale security operation against Boko Haram, which led to the capturing of his founder, Mohammed Yusuf, and his extrajudicial killing thereafter. But most importantly, the Boko Haram group was dismembered. Quite a number of over 1,000 of their members were killed, and then but some of them escaped. It was those that escaped that regrouped outside of Nigeria and went for training camps and linked up with other jihadi groups in the Sahel, especially in northern Mali, and between northern Mali and Mauritania. They linked up with other Salafi jihadist groups in this region. And that transformed Boko Haram from a purely local group into a group that had international connections. And they came back by 2010. The current wave of Boko Haram insurgency started. It started by attacking the headquarters of the police in Nigeria, in Abuja. They bombed the UN country office in Abuja. They attacked churches, banks, all kinds of targets. And that is what has prompted Boko Haram, or that is how it evolved till date. What are the causes of Boko Haram? Of course, there is a mix of both proximate and structural causes. But we can generalize some of these causes to include bad governance, poverty, corruption, political misrule, security failures by security agencies, and also the fact that the coming of Boko Haram coincided with the onset of the youth bulge in Nigeria, but also in the northeast corner, where you had a reservoir of young people that were out of school, out of education, not in vocational skills training, that had little or no prospect of social mobility. They were unemployed, and they were unemployable at the same time. So you had many of these factors actually present in that part of Nigeria. So what has been, how did Boko Haram emerge as a regional security threat? It emerged as a regional security threat in three ways. The first is link up with other jihadist groups in the Sahel, especially in northern Mali and Mauritania. There are as yet unproven allegations or reports that it also had links with Al-Shabaab in Somalia, but there is no concrete evidence to support that claim as yet. But in terms of its linkage to groups in the Sahel, I think there are credible evidence for that, not least in terms of how their fighting strategies and their choice of target has changed. They have become much more sophisticated. They use a lot of improvised explosive devices, a lot of suicide bombing. These were never there until Boko Haram linked up with other groups in the Sahel. So that is one concrete evidence of its emergence as a regional security issue. But other potential evidence of its regional security dimension is the fact that the membership of the group is not just Nigerians, but we also had its membership, it has recruited members from neighboring countries, especially Cameroon, Niger, and Chad. There are also unsubstantiated reports of Somalis and even non-African foreign jihadists in its midst, but that has not been substantiated as yet. But what is very clear is that the membership of Boko Haram currently as it is is drawn from Nigeria, from Chad, from Cameroon, from Niger. So that also makes it a regional security threat. The third basis for it is the fact that the impact and the scale of its attacks and its insurgency operations, they crisscross more than 2 countries. Boko Haram, operates along the border area in the northeast of Nigeria, border communities in Nigeria, both in Nigeria and Niger, Chad, and Cameroon, the original operational basis of Boko Haram. So all of these have meant that Boko Haram is becoming or has become a regional security threat. In addition, is the fact that it has also led to or created a refugee crisis. Of course, internally, there are estimations that Boko Haram has led to the displacement of between 500,000 to 1 million people, internally displaced persons in Nigeria. But in terms of refugees, there is a substantial build-up of Nigerian refugees in some of the neighboring countries, especially in Niger, Chad, and Cameroon. So the impact of Boko Haram crisis is being felt across the sub-region. I think people are having problem with the audio. Let me try to see if my mic, the volume for my mic is at its maximum. 1 second, please.
Hi Holly, you can go ahead. It was just a bit low on our side, but now it's you muted your microphone, so.
Okay. Okay. I've tried to fiddle around with the setting. I don't think there's any more I can do in terms of changing the setting. I think it's at the maximum. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. You can go ahead, all of you.
Okay. So like I was saying, Boko Haram has grown from starting as a purely local group, fueled by local grievances, socio-economic, political, and justice, grievances. It has metamorphosed into a regional security menace for Nigeria and for West Africa, and also joining countries like Cameroon, who are not traditionally part of West Africa, but in Central Africa. So what has been the response pattern thus far? The response pattern so far to the Boko Haram crisis have taken 3 or 4 forms. The first being that between 2003 and 2009, the Nigerian government initially took police action, meaning that regular police were deployed to arrest Boko Haram members. However, by 2009, following the killing of a dozen policemen, the Nigerian state ordered full-scale security action, meaning the armed forces, the military were called in, and that led to the destruction of and dislodgement of Boko Haram from its original base, in Maiduguri. However, Boko Haram came back in full force in 2010 and started, attacking the UN, the Nigerian police headquarters, banks, churches, mosques, government institutions, government offices. So by 2012, the Nigerian state initially declared a minimal state of emergency in some remote areas, remote communities. However, the initial minimal state of emergency was not effective. Accordingly, by the beginning of 2013, January 2013, a full-scale state of emergency was declared in 3 states, namely Borno, Adamawa, and Borno, Adamawa, and Borno, Yobe, and Adamawa state, meaning that the military were given powers of emergency rule, meaning they could arrest, they could take anything they deemed necessary, they could take any action deemed necessary. So, as part of declaring the state of emergency, the Nigerian state from 2011, they formed what they call a multi-agency task force, which is called JTF, Joint Task Force, which is comprised of all key security agencies, including the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, the Department for State Security, the police, the civil defense forces, and the defense intelligence agencies, and all that, as a multi-agency response to Boko Haram. That was initially formed in 2011 as an internal Nigerian security response to Boko Haram crisis. However, by 2012, when the regional dimension of Boko Haram activities became more and more apparent, Nigeria started discussing bilateral security agreements with neighboring countries, especially initially with Cameroon and then later to Niger and Chad. But what is quite important here was that before 2012, as far back as 1998-99, there was a subsisting regional security cooperation framework in the context of among members of the Lake Chad Basin Commission, including Nigeria, Niger, and Chad, over cross-border security. But this was mainly in response to criminal violence, the menace of cross-border banditry and armed robbery. This was so there was that was already subsisting. So what now happened was that by 2012, between 2012 and 2013, that subsisting regional cross-border cooperation on banditry and criminal violence was transformed into a regional security mechanism in response to Boko Haram crisis. and Cameroon that was initially outside of that arrangement. That initial arrangement only covered Nigeria, Niger, and Chad, but Cameroon was included, and they formed what they called MJTF, the Multinational Joint Task Force, which was a regional security or a mechanism for cooperation in security on security issues in relation to Boko Haram insurgencies between Nigeria, including involving Nigeria, Cameroon, Niger, and Chad. So what you have is that this MJTF coordinates security action or military action between the member states in response to Boko Haram crisis. By 2013, the internal dimensions of Nigeria's response, meaning the JTF, was transformed, out of that was created a new Nigerian Army division devoted to fighting terrorism as a counter-terrorism army division. It's called the Nigerian Army Division. This was created in 2013 and it replaced the internal JTF. However, you still have the MJTF still existing till date because it is the framework for cooperation and coordinated security response between Nigeria and its neighbors in the northeast corner. I think that is Boko Haram, by itself on itself. I think the second part of today's presentation is to now look at what is the existing regional security framework in West Africa to which Nigeria, Niger, and Chad belong to. What is quite interesting is that ECOWAS, among all the RECs in Africa, is perhaps often referred to as having the most developed and perhaps the most experienced when it comes to regional security initiatives in Africa. ECOWAS's regional security architecture is founded on 4 key normative frameworks. The first one is the 1993 revised treaty, specifically Article 58 of that specifies ECOWAS or identifies regional security as a key preoccupation of ECOWAS. ECOWAS was created initially in 1975 as a regional economic integration body comprising of 15 members, excluding Mauritania now. Mauritania is no longer a member of ECOWAS now. It started initially for economic integration, but given these experiences with armed conflict in Liberia and Sierra Leone, more or less in West Africa from the late 1980s up to into the 1990s, by 1993 ECOWAS revised its treaty, and in that treaty, ECOWAS more or less transformed itself from purely as an economic integration body into more as a regional political security economic integration institution. Similarly, in 1999, ECOWAS developed or adopted what is called the Mechanism for Conflict Management, Resolution, and Peacekeeping and Security in West Africa. There are specific elements of that 1999 mechanism, the protocol, of that mechanism that also identifies, regional security issues and challenges as a major preoccupation for ECOWAS. Similarly, in 2001, ECOWAS adopted a protocol on democracy and good governance. This came out of the realization that security in West Africa, regional security, cannot just be about hardcore security issues in terms of peacekeeping alone, that democracy and good governance are more or less the soft side of security, while going to be essential conflict prevention or regional security tools. Finally, in 2008, ECOWAS also passed what is known as the Conflict Prevention Framework, the ECPF, which identifies 15 thematic issues or areas, of relevance or of concern to ECOWAS and regional security in West Africa. In the light of this, ECOWAS has sought to develop 3 key policy instruments out of the existing normative framework. The first one is the ECOWAS stands for, more or less the later day version of ECOMOS. This came out of the AGRA mechanism at the African Union. It is quite instructive to know that continental Africa has sought to develop the continental security mechanism called the APSA, African Peace and Security Architecture, of which regional brigades or regional elements are the building blocks. So ECOWAS being one of the 6 recognized rests in Africa plays a key role, and it is meant to coordinate the creation and operationalization of a standby force in West Africa. So that is meant to serve peacekeeping or peace enforcement or peace intervention purposes. The second key policy instrument at the disposal of ECOWAS is the Council of the Wise, which is set up as a mediation mechanism. The Council of the Wise is comprised of eminent individuals, people with moral authority in West Africa, and their role is to mediate in crisis situations. I think on record you've had former presidents or former prime ministers from different ECOWAS countries being appointed as special envoys or peace envoys or peace negotiators in special instances. I'm sure a few people will have heard the name of one of the former rulers in Nigeria, Abubakar Abdul Salam, has been a peace envoy within and outside of West Africa. Similarly, former President Obasanjo has also been a peace envoy, within and outside of West Africa. So the Council of the Wise is meant as a key mediation mechanism at the highest level. The final key policy instrument available to ECOWAS is ECOWAS, which is an conflict observatory, a kind of early warning system. So these are the key policy instruments that have been developed. What is quite interesting is that, and we'll come to that shortly, is that this normative framework and the policy instruments coming out of them are more or less active on paper. In terms of in real life, it is quite debatable the extent to which they are functional. And I think this, in a way, the Boko Haram crisis in a way put some of the issues that are related to the institutionalized sorry, there's a funny noise.
Lawali, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes, okay, thank you. I just would like to tell you that we are left with 10 minutes in question and answers. So if you could kindly quickly finish so that we can have room for asking you questions and conclude the webinar. Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm really sorry. I could listen to you for hours, but we have some time constraints. I'm very sorry.
Yeah, thank you. So coming back, so these are the key policy instruments, but in reality, since many of these policy instruments and even in normative frameworks, they are hardly operationalized. And the Boko Haram crisis, in a way, put in context some of the institutional inadequacies and capacity deficits at ECOWAS and on regional security issues broadly in West Africa. What is it that ECOWAS has done as a regional security mechanism in relation to Boko Haram crisis? My own observation, is that first, ECOWAS, and ECOWAS is not hiding the fact that ECOWAS has had relative inaction. ECOWAS action so far has been limited to offering political support and solidarity statements in the aftermath of key Boko Haram attacks, very specifically in the context of bombing of the UN country office, the police headquarters, and some of the attacks that have attracted casualties. ECOWAS has often issued statements of political support and solidarity statements. Secondly, is that ECOWAS have failed to activate any of the relevant normative frameworks and policy statutes. We don't know why this is the case, but there are suggestions that perhaps, given that Nigeria, is a regional hegemon, and whatever ECOWAS does is anchored on Nigeria's political will, there is a fact that because Nigeria is the country affected in this instance, has meant that there is very little or nothing that ECOWAS can do because Nigeria is, drives ECOWAS activities. Third is that there is, despite clear basis, ECOWAS has not been able to mobilize the standby force. Of course, the operationalization of the standby force in West Africa and across Africa in the context of AFTA is also something that keeps being postponed. I think the latest list now is around 2015 or so. But what is clear is that ECOWAS has not been able to be part of any security intervention in relation to Boko Haram. The intervention so far has been based on Nigeria's bilateral security arrangement with its neighbors. Third is that even in terms of mediation, ECOWAS has not done anything in terms of mediation. And of course, this perhaps is symptomatic of capacity deficit for mediation. It is not just mediation at the highest political level that is important here. It is also the capacity for mediation. There is very little number of skilled mediators and negotiators in West Africa. ECOWAS so far has not been able to create a department for mediation, a unit for mediation within its ECOWAS Commission. I think they are just planning to do that later this year or sometime next year. The three other observations is that ECOWAS has not mobilized any humanitarian relief action, even in the context of refugees emerging from the Boko Haram crisis. Finally, is that there are serious governance issues in terms of the MJTF, in terms of what regulates the conduct of the MJTF, what mechanisms, what protocols, regulate them. Are they just bilateral initiatives, or do they have any implication, or will they be integrated into existing regional security mechanisms? There are question marks in that. So what are the capacity deficits and needs coming out of this? The first is that it's obvious that ECOWAS has limited capacity for mediation and political settlement, low skilled number of skilled mediators and negotiators. Other than at the highest level, using eminent personalities or individuals in the sub-region, ECOWAS has no systematic capacity for mediation. Secondly, is that ECOWAS has no capacity for rapid response. Third is that there is limited force projection capabilities, even for Nigeria as a regional hegemon. And this is quite glaring that in the last 2 years, Nigeria has not been able to decisively deal with Boko Haram as an insurgent group. Next is that there is limited force enablers. One of the key discussions within and outside of Nigeria in terms of response to Boko Haram is the lack of the necessary force enablers like helicopters, like adequate intelligence gathering mechanisms, force mobility issues. These are key issues coming out of it. Finally, is that there is no systemization, little link between early warning, policy statements, and early action in the context of ECOWAS. I wouldn't want to get down into the key observation in terms of what this means for regional security growth, but it is quite obvious from some of the capacity deficit and needs, the kind of implications this will mean. But just brushing through what are the conceptual implications. The first is that the definition of what is regional security in Africa in the context of REX and the AGRA policy definition assumptions, it is quite obvious, given not just Boko Haram, but other responses to other cross-border insurgencies, say the LRA and even the crisis in northern Mali, that what we conventionally define as regional or in the context of general security is changing or has changed. Secondly is that emerging responses are redefining the boundaries and the composition of what is the regional. Third is the fact that external actors, non-African, actors, the United States, France, Russia, sorry, the United States, France, the UK, and a few other non-African countries are beginning to play, or they are critical to regional security interventions in Africa. I will leave it at that to maybe hopefully the next 5 minutes take a few questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wadi. Thank you very much for this presentation. I'm sure there will be many questions coming out. Yes, there are already a couple, and other people are writing. I am just picking one of them. Bill actually asked, I see Nigeria as a central player in ECOWAS, the biggest contributor in terms of troops. Does this ironically impair the effectiveness of ECOWAS for the Boko Haram crisis? Perhaps smaller countries are reluctant to help the big country. And a colleague of mine from a CDS sitting next to me was asking something linked to that actually. He was saying the crisis, the Boko Haram crisis is similar in magnitude and regional coverage to the recent crisis in Mali. Can the Boko Haram crisis be efficiently settled through an international intervention as done in the Mali case? So actually, should we look for the Boko Haram crisis at regional responses from around Nigeria or from an external intervention?
Thank you. Let me just respond. The modus operandi in Mali, is that a potential model that is likely going to be replicated across Africa? Perhaps yes, perhaps no. I think we have to take it as on a case-by-case basis. The fact that it worked in Mali does not necessarily mean it's going to work in Nigeria. And Mali was also there was a special circumstance in terms of France's regional interest in the Sahel, especially in safeguarding, uranium exploration in and around the Sahel. But beyond that, I think what is quite obvious is that regional security itself has two key components. We have the hard component and we have the soft component. And even if the Mali model was to be replicated in the context of the Boko Haram crisis, would that mean the end of the crisis? I don't think no. I think it has to be combined. Military action, decisive military action has to be combined with addressing some of the underlying structural issues that led, or structural conditions that encouraged or that led to the emergence of a group like Boko Haram. And that is where the issue of good governance comes in. Of course, extra-African powers, France, the US, or the UK, they may supply force enablers, such as, intelligence, drones for intelligence gathering, helicopters, and things for, force mobility and all of that to aid the fight against Boko Haram. Putting boots on the ground in that region might be counterproductive. But even if it were to be successful and they were able to put out the Boko Haram bushfire, that does not mean another fire will not arise sooner or later. So it has to be combined with addressing some of the underlying structural issues. And those structural issues are quite peculiar to Nigeria. So we begin to raise the question. There needs to be a debate about what is regional and to what extent can regional institutions actually infringe upon the sovereignty of a country such as Nigeria, and given Nigeria's regional status as a regional hegemon, to compel Nigeria to do the needful in terms of addressing good governance issues. Not minding the fact that Nigeria, subscribes to ECOWAS protocol on democracy and good governance. So what essentially I'm saying is that, yes, the Mali one, if you look across Africa, it seems that African countries, they have the troops, they have the manpower, but they lack the force enablers. Perhaps non-African countries like the US is trying to do in the case of the LRA, could supply the necessary force enablers that will enable African countries to project forth. Still, that would not resolve the structural underpinnings of the crisis. In relation to Bill's question about Nigeria's position within ECOWAS and the fact that Nigeria is a driver of ECOWAS, does that necessarily mean it has incapacitated ECOWAS, to act? Yes and no, but I have a bigger, a broader explanation for that. And my broader explanation for that is that countries don't get involved in regional security issues now like they were in the 1990s. I think the fact that countries have signed up to regional treaties, that countries have, domesticated, regional protocols or treaties or are members of regional economic groupings, which are involved in regional security activities, does not necessarily mean they are going to sign up to participate in every regional security adventure or regional security mission. I think now, when countries are not directly affected in terms of territorially by regional security challenge, and where the country in question does not have any strong strategic or national interest, I think they are unlikely going to sign up into participating in any regional, peacekeeping or security action. I don't, for example, see Ghana, signing up to be part of any intervention force for Boko Haram, because Ghana will start thinking, we've also got, large Muslim majority in northern part of Ghana. Would this not, have implications for us? The situation Kenya is facing in relation to Somalia, the fact that one of the things that people have mentioned is the fact that Kenya has gone into Somalia, and that is also having that is what is responsible for the internal security challenge that Kenya is facing now. So countries are thinking twice. If they are not affected territorially, and if they don't have strategic economic interest or other geostrategic interest for intervening, I don't think they will participate. So I don't think some of the smaller countries in West Africa will sign up to be part of any intervention force against Boko Haram. And I don't even think ECOWAS has the capacity to respond operationally to the Boko Haram crisis, given the specific nature of the crisis. It's not conventional warfare. It is not. I mean, nobody has been able to clearly, identify or spell out the difference between counterterrorism and peace enforcement in such scenarios. What France did against militant jihadi groups in northern Mali, for example, we don't know whether it is purely counterterrorism or whether it is purely peacekeeping or peace enforcement. So again, those are gray areas as well. So if ECOWAS were to go in there, would they be doing counterterrorism? Has ECOWAS done counterterrorism? How many ECOWAS member countries have experience of counterterrorism operation? Has ECOWAS, included counterterrorism issues in its, planning for regional security intervention? I don't think so. So these are very serious operational issues for, that also limit ECOWAS. It's not just the contribution or the availability of troops that is the issue. In terms of mediation and dialogue, I think that is where ECOWAS potentially has a leverage, which it has not tapped into. I think ECOWAS, maybe owing to the fact that Nigeria is the big brother of West Africa, has left everything to Nigeria to sort out. After all, people do say that ECOWAS is at a level Nigeria, and Nigeria is ECOWAS. And if Nigeria cannot deal with the crisis by itself, then what hope has ECOWAS got in stemming the crisis? But I think in terms of negotiation and mediation and dialogue, perhaps ECOWAS could do a bit more. Even in terms of supporting the Nigerian state to reach out to the group, to coordinate the dialogue process, or to build confidence between Nigeria and the jihadi group. Just adopting a blanket categorization that these groups are terrorists, that there is nothing to talk with them, we don't have any basis to negotiate with them. When especially we don't have the capacity to crush them either, I think it's a catch-22 situation for many African countries. So finding ways of opening some lines of communication, finding ways of dialoguing with this group or reaching out to this group It's something ECOWAS could do a bit more. But again, how many skilled negotiators, how many skilled mediators has ECOWAS got professionally, not at the highest political level? So ECOWAS has very little capacity in terms of having skilled mediators and negotiators. So ECOWAS itself is also incapacitated at that level. I'm just trying to see if there are other further questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Wally. Actually, you have addressed the main question that more than one participant were raising about ECOWAS capacities. You addressed it in your last part. Of course, there are a lot of questions that I have and other participants have, and unfortunately, we have run out of time. And so we will be keeping for 48 hours your questions on the LenCD website, and Wally, of course, I will invite you to respond to the question that will be posted on the LenCD website. To conclude, I would say that there is a kind of junction point between what you have been said in your presentation and what Bill was saying about value chain. We were talking about regional answer to insecurity, national answer, external intervention, what is the best way, and on the other side, Bill was mentioning African development corridors, and it rang me a bell of something I was working on in the past, as about development as a way to answer to insecurity, to terrorism, to attacks, and to instability in a country. I was working on that topic in southern Senegal, but I was thinking maybe there will be room to finish this webinar opening the question of how development at the national and international level, through corridors, through everything you mentioned about normative framework, policy instruments, and so on, could in some way indirectly help to stop this kind of insecurity at the national and perhaps regional level. Of course, I mean, I don't have any answer, and I don't know if you and Bill would like to add something. Wally, would you like to add something? Bill, would you like to add something to this question?
I will let you go first, then I'll add something at the end of it. Bill,
thank you.
That's an interesting question. I think I mean, insecurity and terrorism at its roots, needs an audience that is unsatisfied with life at some level, unsatisfied with the level of development. So there may be a connection. I think I'm in the camp where I would prefer development for development's sake and not development kind of framed as anti-terrorism. That's all I have to say.
Yes, thank you, Bill. That was not my purpose, but an indirect effect. I mean, development can be a way to stop some arguments that are used by terrorists to increase participation and to get participation in terrorist attack. That was my point, and I think it can be. I mean, development cannot be used for security purposes, and it cannot be framed by security purposes. But an indirect effect of development can be also the fact that it can decrease the mobilization effect of terrorist groups. But that was just a thought from previous experiences in other countries and in other contexts, completely different from Boko Haram. Wally, would you like to add the final word before we finish?
Yeah, definitely. I at a level, I think I agree with Bill that we have to consider development on its own merit, but also at the end of the day, things, everything is connected to everything else. Nowadays, it's almost, the reality we are faced is that you can hardly talk of development on its own merit without, looking at it in, as also a conflict prevention tool, but also as the basis for building regional economics of scale. I think what the Boko Haram crisis is showing is that the rhetoric about regional security, for so long there has been a lot of rhetoric about regional security in Africa. Some of the regional security mechanisms, they are inadequate for emerging kinds of regional security threats and challenges. I think the existing mechanisms and treaties and institutions, both at the regional level and also at the continental level, they are still framed by the mindset of the 1990s, the experience of genocide, preventing a genocide, intervening in a classical civil wars like we had in Liberia and Sierra Leone and the rest. They are not readily adaptable to emerging scenarios. Not just in the context of Boko Haram. You look at what is happening in the LRA crisis. You look at even the intervention, the model, for the intervention in Mali. These kinds of response to emerging regional security issues, they are outside of some of these grandiose institutional configurations being built at the regional and continental level. And perhaps we should move away from trying to build white elephant regional security projects at the regional level, and perhaps focus on maybe ad hoc or smaller, more effective, much more mobile, much more less bureaucratic response options and mechanisms, and find ways of, for example, the NGATF, even though it's not been too successful, but I think the fact that for the first time some 4 countries are cooperating outside of any known regional framework is something that is worth looking at. And you have other examples of those kind of experiments beginning to emerge as responses to emerging or new kinds of regional security challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wally. Thank you very much to all of you. I am left only with 1 minute, I think, because we ran out of time. I'm left with 1 minute just to thank you, the presenters, to thank LenCD for giving us this opportunity, to remind you the survey, the participant survey, please, to fill in a few minutes. Daniele wrote in the chat room the address for putting your survey. It's the Survey Monkey, that the address you see in the chat room. And just a last announcement. Accountability, and it will be co-organized between LenCD and the Center for International Media Assistance. I thank all of you, and I thank all the participants. I think it was a good webinar. I thank the presenters again for their great presentations. I thank Daniele for his introduction, and if there are no other burning questions, I think that we can close this webinar. Thank you all, and again, your comments in the Survey Monkey, and I tell you, see you again during the next webinar. And of course, the participants, the presenters will be answering your questions for 24-48 hours on the LenCD website. Thank you all, and have a good end of the day or a good afternoon for the ones for which it is still morning. Thank you all. Goodbye.